He lived alone for 20 years, haunted by the ghosts of his past, until one Christmas Eve, a woman showed up at his door, delivering a letter that would change everything. She wasn't just any woman. She came from a past he never knew existed, one that could shatter everything he thought he knew about himself. The truth? He had a son he never knew, a son who, after all these years, was still out there. Now, as Christmas brings them together, old wounds reopen, and with it, a chance for redemption, or a lifetime of regret. Can a broken man rebuild the family he abandoned, or will the truth tear them apart forever? What happens when the past you buried comes knocking on your door? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The December wind whistled through the bare branches, sending snow swirling across the manicured grounds of Maxwell Harrison's estate. The mansion loomed against the darkening sky, its windows gleaming like cold eyes in the fading winter light. Inside, Maxwell stood at his office window, watching the snow fall with unseeing eyes. 20 years, 2 decades of Christmas Eves spent alone, each one a painful reminder of what he'd lost. The tastefully decorated tree in the corner of his study, placed there by his housekeeper, who insisted on maintaining traditions, only deepened the ache in his chest. Maxwell's fingers traced the smooth surface of his desk, its polished mahogany a stark contrast to the warmth that family photos might have provided. Instead, there were only business awards and financial reports. He checked his watch. 7:30 in the evening. Most of his employees would be home now, celebrating with their families. The thought made his jaw clench. The sudden chime of the doorbell cut through the silence, startling him. Maxwell frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone, and his staff had the day off. The bell rang again, more insistent this time. With measured steps, he made his way down the sweeping staircase, his footfalls echoing in the empty house. The security screen showed a young woman standing at his door, stamping her feet against the cold. She wore a purple wool coat, and snowflakes dotted her dark curls. Maxwell hesitated, his hand on the door handle. He'd perfected the art of keeping people at arm's length, building walls as solid as the mansion around him. But something in the woman's determined expression made him pull the door open. "Mr. Harrison?" The woman's breath fogged in the cold air. "I'm Jasmine Taylor. I apologize for coming so late, but this couldn't wait." Her warm brown eyes met his, unwavering despite his stern expression. "Whatever it is, it can wait until after the holidays," Maxwell said, starting to close the door. Jasmine quickly held up an envelope, yellowed with age. "It's about your wife, sir, and your son." Maxwell's hand froze on the door. The wind whipped around them, carrying snowflakes into the foyer. "What did you say?" "Please, Mr. Harrison, 5 minutes is all I ask." Her voice was gentle but firm, like someone used to navigating difficult conversations. Against his better judgment, Maxwell stepped aside. Jasmine entered, bringing with her a burst of cold air and something else, an energy that seemed to disturb the carefully maintained stillness of his home. In the bright light of the foyer, he could see her more clearly. She was younger than he'd first thought, probably in her late 20s. Her natural confidence suggested someone comfortable in her own skin, despite standing in the home of one of the city's most powerful CEOs. "Follow me," Maxwell said curtly, leading her to his study. The Christmas tree's lights cast soft shadows across the room. Jasmine's gaze lingered on the bare walls, the absence of family photos speaking volumes. "My mother worked for your family," Jasmine began, standing near his desk. "She was your wife's housekeeper." Maxwell's chest tightened. He hadn't thought about Maria Taylor in years. "Maria, yes, I remember. Mom passed away last month," Jasmine said softly. "While going through her things, I found this." She held out the envelope. "It's a letter from your wife. Mom was supposed to give it to you, but, well, after the accident, you shut everyone out. She never got the chance." Maxwell stared at the envelope as if it might burn him. His wife's handwriting was immediately recognizable, the elegant curve of the letters, the way she wrote his name. Sarah's writing? His hands trembled slightly as he took it. "Why now?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why bring this to me on Christmas Eve?" Jasmine's expression softened. "Because I know what it's like to spend Christmas wondering about what could have been, and because everyone deserves a chance at healing, Mr. Harrison. Even you." The simple honesty in her words struck him like a physical blow. Maxwell sank into his chair, the envelope heavy in his hands. Sarah's last words to him, preserved in this yellowed paper for 20 years. "Would you like me to leave?" Jasmine asked quietly. Maxwell looked up, suddenly aware of how long he'd been silent. In the gentle glow of the Christmas lights, he saw no pity in Jasmine's eyes, only understanding and something else, something that looked remarkably like hope. "No," he found himself saying. "Please stay." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Jasmine nodded and settled into one of the leather chairs across from his desk. She didn't push him to open the letter, didn't fill the silence with empty words. Instead, she simply sat with him, a quiet witness to this unexpected moment. Maxwell turned the envelope over in his hands, his fingers tracing the seal. 20 years of running his company with ruthless efficiency, of keeping everyone at a distance, of building walls so high he'd forgotten what it felt like to let anyone in. And now, on Christmas Eve, this young woman had walked into his life with a piece of his past he'd thought was lost forever. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 8, its deep chimes echoing through the house. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the world into something softer, something that held the possibility of change. And for the first time in 2 decades, Maxwell Harrison felt the walls he'd built around his heart begin to crack. "Would you like some tea?" he asked, surprising himself again. I think this might take a while." A warm smile spread across Jasmine's face, bringing light to her eyes. "Tea would be wonderful, Mr. Harrison." As Maxwell stood to ring for his kitchen staff, then remembered they were off for the holiday, he found himself walking to the kitchen himself. This simple act, making tea for a guest, felt foreign, yet somehow right. Perhaps it was time to remember how to do these things again. Perhaps it was time to remember how to live again. The letter waited on his desk, a bridge between past and present, between loss and possibility. And somehow, on this snowy Christmas Eve, Maxwell Harrison wasn't alone anymore. This poignant moment marked the beginning of a story that would unfold in unexpected ways, challenging everything Maxwell had come to believe about love, loss, and the possibility of second chances. The arrival of Jasmine Taylor with her mother's final gift would prove to be more than just a delivery of a long-lost letter. It would become the catalyst for a journey of healing that Maxwell never expected to take. The mansion, usually so cold and empty on Christmas Eve, held a different energy now. The soft glow of Christmas lights, the gentle fall of snow outside, and the presence of an unexpected guest created an atmosphere of possibility. For the first time in 20 years, Maxwell Harrison felt something stir in his heart, a tiny spark of hope he thought had died along with his family. And as he prepared the tea in his rarely used kitchen, he couldn't help but wonder what Sarah's words would reveal, and why fate had chosen this particular Christmas Eve to deliver them. The evening air bit sharply as Jasmine stood before the wrought-iron gates of the Harrison estate. Snow drifted down in lazy spirals, dusting her dark wool coat with white flakes that melted almost instantly. She clutched her worn leather bag closer, feeling the weight of the envelope inside. An envelope that should have been delivered 2 decades ago. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, watching her breath form clouds in the frigid December air. The mansion loomed ahead, a sprawling structure of stone and glass that seemed to touch the darkening sky. Christmas lights twinkled along the perfectly manicured hedges, but they felt more like a decoration for show than a celebration of the season. Jasmine pressed the intercom button, her gloved finger trembling slightly. The security system crackled to life. "Yes?" A crisp, masculine voice answered. "Good evening. My name is Jasmine Taylor. I have an important delivery for Mr. Maxwell Harrison." She tried to keep her voice steady, professional. There was a long pause before the gates slowly swung open. Jasmine made her way up the winding driveway, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. The perfectly symmetrical topiaries and marble fountains, now silent and frozen for winter, spoke of wealth that seemed worlds away from her own modest apartment in the east side of town. The massive front door opened before she could knock, revealing a tall man with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp features. Maxwell Harrison cut an imposing figure in his tailored charcoal suit, his steel-grey eyes regarding her with cool detachment. "Mr. Harrison," Jasmine began, "thank you for seeing me. I know it's Christmas Eve." "Make it quick," he interrupted, his tone clipped. "I have matters to attend to." Jasmine straightened her spine, refusing to be intimidated. "Sir, I found something while helping my mother sort through her belongings. She worked for your family 20 years ago, before the accident." Something flickered in Maxwell's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or anger, before his expression hardened again. "That was a long time ago. Whatever it is, I'm not interested." He started to close the door, but Jasmine quickly spoke up. "It's a letter from your wife, Mr. Harrison, from Sarah." The door stopped mid-swing. Maxwell's hand gripped the doorframe so tightly his knuckles turned white. For a moment, neither of them moved or spoke. The only sound was the soft whisper of falling snow. "Come in," he finally said, his voice barely audible. Jasmine stepped into an entrance hall that could have housed her entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors and artwork that probably cost more than she made in a year. But despite its grandeur, the space felt hollow, like a museum after hours. Maxwell led her to his study, a room lined with leather-bound books and dominated by a massive mahogany desk. He didn't offer her a seat, but Jasmine sat anyway in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Something told her this man needed someone to stand their ground with him. "My mother found this while cleaning out her old chest," Jasmine explained, reaching into her bag. She was too ill to deliver it herself, and honestly she wasn't sure if she should. "But I believe some things are meant to find their way home, even if they're late." She placed the envelope on his desk. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, but Sarah Harrison's elegant handwriting was still clear on the front. Maxwell stared at it as if it might disappear. "Your mother. She worked here?" "Yes, she was your housekeeper, Martha Taylor. She always spoke kindly of Mrs. Harrison, said she was one of the most genuine people she'd ever known." A muscle twitched in Maxwell's jaw. "Martha. Yes, I remember her. She was good to my family. She wanted to be here when everything happened," Jasmine said softly. "But she was in the hospital herself then, fighting pneumonia. By the time she recovered, new staff had been hired and everyone was told to keep their distance. She never got the chance to give you this." Maxwell's hands trembled slightly as he picked up the envelope. Jasmine watched as emotions played across his face. Grief, fear, longing. The carefully maintained facade of the powerful CEO cracked just enough to show the wounded man beneath. Why now? He asked roughly. Why deliver this on Christmas Eve? Jasmine leaned forward, her dark eyes meeting his. Because everyone deserves a chance at peace, Mr. Harrison, even you. Something in her words seemed to reach him. He sank into his chair, the letter heavy in his hands. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like a shared moment of understanding. Would you? Maxwell cleared his throat. Would you like some tea? The question seemed to surprise them both. Jasmine smiled warmly, sensing that this simple offer meant more than it appeared. Yes, I would. Thank you. As Maxwell stood to ring for staff, she noticed his hand hover over the bell before dropping. I forgot. They're off for the holiday. I'll have to make it myself. I can help. Jasmine offered, standing. My mother taught me the proper way to brew tea. She said Mrs. Harrison was very particular about it. A ghost of a smile touched Maxwell's lips. She was. Earl Grey, steeped exactly 4 minutes, not a second more or less. They walked to the kitchen together, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The kitchen, though state-of-the-art, had the unlived-in feel of a showroom. Maxwell moved uncertainly through the space, opening cabinets at random until Jasmine gently took over. As she filled the kettle, she noticed him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. The letter sat on the counter between them, waiting. You remind me of her somewhat, Maxwell said suddenly. Sarah, I mean. She had that same directness, the ability to see through people's defenses. Jasmine measured out the tea leaves carefully. Tell me about her. The request was simple, but it opened a door that had been closed for 20 years. As the water heated, Maxwell Harrison began to speak. His words came haltingly at first, then with increasing flow, like a river breaking through ice. He spoke of Sarah's laugh, her passion for gardening, the way she could light up a room just by entering it. The tea steeped as they talked, the aroma filling the kitchen with warmth. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the world into something softer, something that held the possibility of change. And in that moment, on a Christmas Eve he'd planned to spend alone, Maxwell Harrison found himself sharing memories he'd locked away for 2 decades with a stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. The grandiosity of the mansion seemed to fade away as they sat there, 2 people connected by a long-lost letter and the simple act of sharing tea. Jasmine's warmth and genuine interest drew out stories Maxwell hadn't allowed himself to remember, while her own openness about her struggles and hopes helped bridge the vast gap between their worlds. As they talked, the clock ticked toward midnight, neither of them quite ready to break the unexpected connection that had formed. The letter still waited to be read, but for now, this moment, this simple, human connection, was enough. It was a reminder that even in the coldest of places, warmth could still be found, and that sometimes the most meaningful gifts come in the most unexpected ways. The kitchen felt warmer now, more lived in, as Maxwell and Jasmine settled at the large marble island with their tea. Something about her presence had transformed the cold, sterile space into something almost homey. The aroma of Earl Grey tea mingled with the scent of fresh-baked cookies that Jasmine had pulled from her bag. A Christmas tradition, she'd explained, that her mother had always maintained. I hope you don't mind, Jasmine said, gesturing to the small figure beside her. My son Jake was with the neighbor, but she had an emergency. He's very well behaved. Maxwell glanced at the quiet boy who sat coloring in a worn notebook. Something about the child's serious expression and the way he held his pencil with careful precision stirred a memory Maxwell couldn't quite grasp. Of course, Maxwell replied, though children had been absent from his life for so long that he felt oddly unsettled. Would he like some hot chocolate? Jake's eyes lit up, but he looked to his mother first. Jasmine nodded, and Maxwell found himself moving through his kitchen again, this time with more purpose. As he worked, Jasmine's voice filled the space with warmth. "You know, my mother used to make the best hot chocolate for your family during the holidays," she said, causing Maxwell to pause mid-motion. "She worked here for 15 years, Mr. Harrison. Martha Johnson?" The name hit Maxwell like a physical force. Martha, the kind-faced woman who had been more than just a maid. She had been a constant presence throughout his childhood, always there with a warm smile and gentle words of wisdom. She had stayed on even after his marriage to Sarah, becoming almost like family. "Martha was your mother." Maxwell's voice came out rough with emotion. I lost track of her after everything happened," Jasmine finished softly. "She understood, Mr. Harrison. She always spoke of you with such fondness. She remembered the young man who would sneak extra food to the kitchen staff during late nights, who set up a college fund for the groundskeeper's children, who never passed by someone in need without stopping to help." Maxwell's hands shook slightly as he stirred the hot chocolate. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else, a different man, one who hadn't been hollowed out by grief and loss. "Your mother was an extraordinary woman," he managed. "She helped raise me in many ways after my own mother passed. She told me those stories too," Jasmine said, "about how you'd sit in the kitchen late at night, talking about your dreams for the company, about making a difference in people's lives. She said you had the biggest heart of anyone she'd ever known." Maxwell set the hot chocolate in front of Jake, who thanked him with shy politeness. The boy's manners, his careful movements, they tugged at something in Maxwell's mind again. "What happened to Martha?" he asked, unable to keep the question inside any longer. "She passed away 5 years ago," Jasmine said quietly. "Cancer. But she never lost her faith in people, in goodness. She never lost her faith in you, either." Maxwell felt the weight of those words settle in his chest. He looked at Jasmine, really looked at her, and saw echoes of Martha in her warm eyes, her gentle strength. "She wanted you to have this letter," Jasmine continued, touching the envelope that still lay unopened between them. "She wrote it 20 years ago, but circumstances... well, she never got the chance to deliver it." Jake had stopped coloring now, his dark eyes fixed on Maxwell with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. There was something familiar in that gaze, something that made his heart race with an emotion he couldn't name. "Mommy," Jake said suddenly, his voice small but clear in the quiet kitchen. "Is it time?" Jasmine reached out and took her son's hand, her own trembling slightly. "Yes, baby, I think it is." She turned to Maxwell, her eyes filling with tears. "There's something else you need to know, Mr. Harrison. Something my mother took to her grave, something I've carried for 8 years." Maxwell felt the world tilt slightly, as if everything was shifting just a few degrees off its axis. Jake was still watching him, those serious eyes never wavering. "Mommy says you're my daddy," Jake whispered. The words hung in the air like crystal, delicate and sharp. Maxwell's teacup clattered against its saucer as his hands lost their strength. His mind raced through calculations, through memories, through possibilities he'd never considered. That's not possible," he managed, but even as he spoke, he knew it was. 20 years ago, just before Sarah's death, there had been one night, one moment of comfort sought in grief, in fear, in the devastating knowledge that his wife's pregnancy was failing. Martha had been there, as she always was, offering solace in his darkest hour. "My mother never told you," Jasmine said softly. "She found out she was pregnant just after the accident. By then you had shut yourself away from everyone. She tried to reach you, but—" She gestured at the letter. "This explains everything." Maxwell's vision blurred as he looked at Jake. Really, looked at him. The serious expression, the precise way he held his pencil, the shape of his nose, the set of his jaw. It was like looking at his own childhood photographs. A son. He had a son. The careful walls he'd built around his heart for 20 years began to crack. Grief, joy, anger, hope, emotions he'd denied for so long came rushing in like a tide. His hands shook as he reached for the letter, but he couldn't bring himself to open it yet. "All this time," he whispered, his voice breaking. "All this time, I thought I'd lost everything." Jake stood up slowly, moving around the island with the deliberate grace of a child who'd been taught to be careful, to be good, to not take up too much space. He stopped beside Maxwell's chair and looked up at him with those familiar eyes. "Can I—" The boy hesitated, then gathered his courage. "Can I call you Dad?" The last of Maxwell's defenses crumbled. Tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in 20 years spilled down his cheeks as he looked at this miracle, this second chance he never knew he had. The past he'd buried resurfaced with overwhelming force, not just the pain and loss, but the love and hope he'd once known, the man he'd once been. "Yes," he managed through his tears. "Yes, you can." And in that moment, on a snowy Christmas Eve in a kitchen that had been cold for far too long, something long frozen began to thaw. The weight of 20 years of isolation lifted slightly, making room for something new, something warm, something that felt remarkably like hope. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. Maxwell's hands trembled as he stared at Jake, his newly discovered son, trying to process the enormity of this revelation. 20 years of self-imposed isolation, of building walls around his heart. And now this. A child he never knew existed. Jasmine watched them both, her heart aching at the raw emotion on Maxwell's face. She reached across the kitchen island and gently placed her hand on his arm. "I know this is overwhelming," she said softly. "Take your time." Maxwell drew in a shaky breath. "I don't even know where to begin," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "All these years." Jake had settled back into his chair, his dark eyes moving between the adults with careful attention. Jasmine could see the questions forming in his young mind, the same questions she'd faced throughout her childhood. "Maybe," Jasmine suggested gently, "we could start by getting to know each other. No pressure, just talking." Maxwell nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. "Yes," he managed. "Yes, I'd like that." Jasmine smiled warmly and began to share her story. "I grew up on Cedar Street," she said, "in the east side of town. Mom, your former maid Martha, she worked so hard to give me everything she could. We didn't have much, but we had love. And she taught me that was the most important thing." As she spoke, Maxwell's rigid posture began to soften slightly. He listened intently as Jasmine described her childhood, the small apartment above Mrs. Johnson's flower shop, the community garden where they grew vegetables to share, the library where she discovered her love of writing. "When Jake came along," she continued, her eyes softening as she looked at her son, "I was just 21. It wasn't easy, being a single mum, but Mom helped me. She watched Jake while I finished college, worked odd jobs, built my freelance writing career." Maxwell's voice was barely audible when he asked, "Why didn't she tell me?" Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. "She tried at first, but you were unreachable, lost in your own grief." She understood that. She really did. And then, as time passed, she worried that suddenly appearing with a child would only cause you more pain. Maxwell stood abruptly, walking to the window. Outside, snow was falling softly, coating the manicured grounds in white. His shoulders were tense, his reflection in the glass showing the internal struggle playing across his features. "After Sarah died," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion, I couldn't bear to feel anything. It was easier to shut everything out, to focus on work, to pretend that part of my life never existed." Jasmine rose and moved to stand beside him, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I understand," she said quietly. "Grief can do that to a person, but Maxwell, it's never too late for second chances." He turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes made her heart ache. "I don't know how," he admitted. "I don't know how to be a father, how to open up again, how to—" "Nobody does at first," Jasmine assured him. "We all learn as we go. Look at Jake. He's patient, kind, understanding. He knows this isn't easy for any of us." As if on cue, Jake approached them, his small hand reaching out to touch Maxwell's arm. "It's okay to be scared," he said with the simple wisdom of children. "Mum says being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you try anyway." Maxwell's breath caught in his throat. He looked down at this child, his child, and saw not just the shadow of his own features, but also the warmth and wisdom that must have come from Martha's influence. "Your mother," he said to Jasmine. "She was an extraordinary woman. She saw good in everyone, even when they couldn't see it in themselves." Jasmine nodded, wiping away a tear. She never lost faith in people. Even when things were hard, she believed in the power of love to heal, to transform. She believed in you, Maxwell. She knew the man you were before tragedy struck, and she believed that man was still in there somewhere. As the snow continued to fall outside, the three of them stood together in a moment of shared vulnerability. Maxwell felt something shift inside him, a crack in the fortress he'd built around his heart, letting in a sliver of light. "Would you—" he hesitated, then pressed on. "Would you both stay for dinner? I know it's Christmas Eve and you probably have plans, but we'd love to," Jasmine said warmly. "Wouldn't we, Jake?" Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Can I help cook? Mom says I'm getting really good at mixing salads." For the first time in what felt like decades, Maxwell felt the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "I'd like that," he said softly. "I'd like that very much." As they moved together toward the kitchen, Maxwell felt the weight of 20 years of isolation beginning to lift. It wasn't gone, not completely. But in its place, he felt something new taking root. Something that felt remarkably like hope. Jasmine watched as Jake eagerly showed Maxwell how to tear lettuce leaves just right for a salad, and her heart swelled with emotion. She saw the tentative way Maxwell interacted with his son, the careful gentleness in his movements, the wonder in his eyes as he discovered each new facet of Jake's personality. "You know," she said softly, "Mom used to tell me that healing doesn't happen all at once. It comes in small moments, in tiny choices to let light back in." Maxwell looked up at her, his eyes glistening. "Your mother. She always knew exactly what to say. Just like you do." The connection between them grew stronger as the evening progressed, built on shared memories of Martha, on Jake's innocent questions, on the gradual opening of hearts long closed. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of awkwardness, of uncertainty. But it was real, and it was a beginning. As they worked together preparing dinner, Maxwell found himself sharing more about his past, about Sarah, about the life they'd had, about the dreams they'd shared, Each word seemed to lift a little more of the burden he'd carried for so long, and in Jasmine's compassionate eyes, he found the strength to keep going. The kitchen filled with warmth as they worked together preparing dinner. Steam rose from pots on the stove, and the rich aroma of herbs and spices filled the air. Jake had pulled up a chair to the counter, carefully arranging cucumber slices in neat rows on top of the salad he'd created. Maxwell watched him with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty, still processing the revelation that he had a son. "He has your focus," Jasmine observed softly, stirring the pot of soup on the stove. "That same careful attention to detail." Maxwell's hand stilled on the cutting board where he'd been chopping carrots. "I never thought—" He paused, struggling to find the words. "All these years, I convinced myself I didn't deserve another chance at family." Jasmine set down her wooden spoon and turned to face him. "Life isn't about what we deserve, Maxwell. It's about what we choose to do with the opportunities we're given." The truth of her words hit him hard. For 20 years, he'd chosen isolation. He'd wrapped himself in work and wealth, building walls so high that no one could reach him. But here was Jasmine, somehow finding cracks in those defenses with her gentle wisdom and open heart. "Perfect," Jake announced proudly, stepping back from his salad masterpiece. "Mom, look! I made it just like you taught me." Jasmine smiled warmly at her son. "It looks beautiful, honey. Why don't you show Maxwell how you arranged everything?" Jake eagerly began explaining his technique to Maxwell, who found himself drawn into the boy's enthusiasm. "See, you put the dark green leaves on the bottom, then the lighter ones, and the colorful stuff goes on top. Mum says we eat with our eyes first." "Your mother is very wise," Maxwell said softly, meeting Jasmine's gaze across the kitchen. Something shifted in his chest, a warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. As they sat down to eat, Maxwell noticed how different his dining room felt. Usually cold and formal, tonight it was filled with the sounds of Jake's cheerful chatter, Jasmine's warm laughter, and the clink of silverware against plates. The massive table that had always seemed to emphasize his solitude now felt like it was finally serving its true purpose. "Tell me," he said during a lull in conversation, "about your writing, Jasmine. What made you choose that path?" Jasmine's eyes lit up. "I've always believed in the power of stories," she explained, helping Jake cut his chicken into smaller pieces. "Stories help us understand each other, help us see that we're not alone in our struggles or our hopes. Like how Mom writes about people finding their way back to happiness." Jake piped up. Maxwell felt those words sink deep into his soul. "Finding their way back to happiness," he repeated quietly. "I wouldn't even know where to begin." "You already have begun," Jasmine said gently. "Look at tonight. Look at this moment right here. 24 hours ago, would you have imagined sharing a meal like this?" He shook his head, overwhelmed by the truth of it. Yesterday, his house had been as empty as his heart. Today there was warmth, conversation, connection, things he'd convinced himself he could live without. "It's scary, isn't it?" Jasmine continued, her voice soft with understanding. "Opening up again, letting people in. But Maxwell, the world hasn't stopped turning while you've been hiding from it. There's still so much life to be lived, so much love to be given and received." Tears pricked at his eyes, and for once he didn't try to fight them back. "I've wasted so much time," he whispered. "No," Jasmine said firmly. "You haven't wasted anything. You were surviving the only way you knew how. But now you have a choice. You can keep those walls up, or you can start taking them down brick by brick." Jake reached across the table and placed his small hand on Maxwell's arm. Mom says it's okay to be scared of change, but sometimes the scary things are the most important ones. Maxwell looked at this child, so wise beyond his years, so open with his affection, and felt something crack open inside his chest. The defensive walls he'd built weren't just keeping pain out, they were keeping life out too. Love, joy, connection, he'd denied himself all of it. As the evening progressed, they moved to the living room. Jake curled up in an armchair with a book he'd found on the shelf, while Maxwell and Jasmine sat on the sofa, talking softly about everything and nothing. She told him about her struggles as a single mother, about the determination it took to build a career while raising a child, about the unwavering faith that had carried her through the hardest times. "Your strength amazes me," Maxwell admitted. "To face such challenges and still maintain such hope." Jasmine smiled. "Hope isn't something you have or don't have, Maxwell. It's something you choose every day, sometimes every hour. And yes, it's hard. But the alternative? Giving up, shutting down. That's harder in the long run." He thought about his own choice to shut down, to close himself off from life. It hadn't protected him from pain, it had just prevented him from healing. Looking at Jasmine now, seeing the light in her eyes and the warmth in her smile, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Possibility. The clock struck 9, and Jake's head had begun to droop over his book. "We should probably head home," Jasmine said softly, standing up. "It's getting late." Maxwell felt panic rise in his chest at the thought of them leaving, of his house returning to its usual emptiness. Thank you," he managed, "for everything, for showing me that maybe it's not too late." Jasmine's eyes softened with understanding. "It's never too late, Maxwell. Never too late to start again, to open your heart, to let love back in. You just have to be brave enough to take that first step." As he watched them gather their things, Maxwell realized something profound. The healing he'd been avoiding for 20 years might have just begun, brought about by an unexpected delivery and two extraordinary people who had somehow found their way past his defenses. For the first time in decades, he felt ready to embrace that healing, ready to step back into life, ready to believe that love might still be possible. The glimmer of hope he felt wasn't just a fleeting emotion. It was the first ray of dawn after a very long night, promising the possibility of a new day, a new beginning, a new chance at life and love. The morning after Christmas dawned cold and grey, matching Maxwell's turbulent mood. He sat in his home office, surrounded by stacks of old papers and photographs, searching for any clue that might lead him to his son. His hands trembled as he opened another dusty folder, the weight of 20 years of ignorance pressing down on his shoulders. "There has to be something," he muttered, rifling through employment records from that time period. His former maid, Maria, had worked for his family for nearly a decade. How could he have missed such a significant detail about her life? The guilt gnawed at him, making his stomach churn. The phone buzzed, another message from Jasmine. She had been checking in regularly since Christmas, her genuine concern evident in every text. Maxwell stared at the screen, but couldn't bring himself to reply. Her kindness only made him feel worse about everything he'd missed, everything he'd ignored while wrapped up in his own grief. A knock at his office door made him jump. "Mr. Harrison?" his assistant called out. "The board members are waiting for the emergency meeting." Maxwell rubbed his tired eyes. Right, the business crisis. His main competitor had launched a hostile takeover attempt, taking advantage of his recent distraction. The business rival, a man he'd once considered a friend, had been methodically undermining his position for months. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes," he called back, gathering his papers into a messy pile. His phone buzzed again. Jasmine, just wanted to make sure you're okay. You don't have to go through this alone. Maxwell's throat tightened. He typed out a quick response. I need some time. Please understand. Then he turned off his phone completely. The board meeting was tense from the start. The business rival sat at the far end of the table, a smug smile playing at his lips. Maxwell, he said smoothly, so kind of you to finally join us. We were just discussing the company's concerning direction lately. Maxwell straightened his tie, forcing himself to focus. Our direction is exactly as planned. The quarterly reports. The business rival interrupted. Show a disturbing trend of indecision and missed opportunities. Your personal distractions are affecting the company's performance. The words hit home harder than Maxwell wanted to admit. He had been distracted, consumed by thoughts of his possible son, by memories of Maria, by Jasmine's warmth and understanding. The business rival wasn't wrong. He was losing his grip. I assure you, Maxwell said firmly, my personal life has no bearing on my ability to lead this company. No? The business rival raised an eyebrow. Then perhaps you'd like to explain why you missed 3 crucial meetings last week, or why the Mitchell contract fell through. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Maxwell felt the control slipping through his fingers, just like everything else in his life. After the meeting, Maxwell retreated to his office, locking the door behind him. He turned his phone back on, and immediately messages from Jasmine flooded in. Each one filled with concern, support, understanding. It was too much. He couldn't handle her kindness, not when he felt so undeserving. He spent the next several hours diving deeper into his search for his son. Old hospital records, school registrations, anything that might give him a lead. Each dead end felt like another failure, another reminder of how completely he had failed as a father. Not just to the son he lost, but to the one he never knew existed. As evening fell, a soft knock came at his office door. Maxwell? It was Jasmine's voice. Your assistant called me. She's worried about you. Maxwell closed his eyes, his hands clenching into fists. Please, Jasmine, I can't do this right now. Do what? Her voice was gentle but firm. Talk to someone who cares about you. Accept help. You don't understand, he said, his voice breaking. I abandoned him. I didn't even know he existed, but I abandoned him just the same. And now everything's falling apart. The company, my life. I can't drag you into this mess. There was a long pause. Maxwell, Jasmine finally said, pushing people away won't fix anything. It won't change the past, and it won't protect your future. Please, let me help. But Maxwell couldn't move, couldn't open the door, couldn't let her see him like this, broken, lost, drowning in guilt and fear. I'm sorry, he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. I need to be alone. He heard her sigh, then the soft sound of her footsteps retreating down the hallway. The silence that followed was deafening. Maxwell turned back to his computer, pulling up more records, more searches. The business rival's words echoed in his head, mixing with his own self-doubt and recrimination. He had built his empire by shutting out everything else, everyone else. Maybe that was the only way he knew how to function. The night grew deeper, and Maxwell remained in his office, surrounded by the ghosts of his past and the shadows of his failures. Outside, the world moved on, but inside his self-imposed prison, time seemed to stand still. He was retreating, he knew it, falling back into old patterns, old defenses. But it felt safer than facing the truth, that he might have a son out there who grew up without a father, that he might have found someone who could help him heal, that he might be throwing away his last chance at redemption. The business rival's takeover threat loomed large, a tangible excuse to withdraw completely into the familiar comfort of work and isolation. It was easier than facing the mess he'd made of everything else, easier than accepting help, than opening himself to the possibility of more pain, more loss. As midnight approached, Maxwell finally left his office, walking through his empty house to his equally empty bedroom. The Christmas decorations Jasmine had helped put up now seemed to mock him, reminders of a brief moment when he'd allowed himself to hope for something different, something more. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his phone still showing Jasmine's unanswered messages. Tomorrow, he decided, he would throw himself back into work. He would fight off the takeover attempt, protect his company, retreat behind the walls that had kept him safe, if not happy, for so many years. It was what he knew. It was what he deserved. And if his heart ached at the thought of pushing Jasmine away, of giving up the search for his son, well, that was just one more pain to add to all the others he'd learned to live with. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maxwell's office as he reviewed the quarterly reports. Something wasn't adding up. He'd spent 20 years building this company, and his instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Numbers that should have matched didn't quite align. Projects that should have been profitable showed unexpected losses. His phone buzzed again, another message from Jasmine. He glanced at it briefly before turning the phone face down. Her warmth, her understanding. It was more than he could handle right now. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, not looking up from the spreadsheets scattered across his desk. "Maxwell." The business rival's smooth voice made him tense. "I thought we should talk." Maxwell finally looked up, noting the calculated smile on the other man's face. "What do you want, James?" "I'm here as a friend." The business rival settled into the chair across from Maxwell's desk, uninvited. "The board is concerned. There are rumors about your stability, your focus." "Rumors you started, no doubt," Maxwell said coldly. The business rival spread his hands in a gesture of false innocence. "I'm merely the messenger. But you have to admit, your behavior lately has been erratic, taking time off during crucial negotiations, entertaining visitors during business hours." His smile turned predatory. "That young woman seems to have quite an effect on you." Maxwell's jaw clenched. "My personal life is none of your concern. It is when it affects the company, when it affects all of us." The business rival leaned forward. "I've been watching you unravel, Maxwell. First the mysterious searches through old records, then the emotional outbursts in meetings. The board is starting to wonder if you're still fit to lead." The words hit Maxwell like physical blows, because underneath the manipulation, there was a kernel of truth. He had been distracted. The search for his son, the growing connection with Jasmine, the way his carefully constructed walls were crumbling, it was affecting his focus. "I have proof," the business rival continued smoothly, "of some rather questionable decisions you've made recently. Financial discrepancies that could raise serious concerns if brought to the board's attention." Maxwell's blood ran cold. The numbers that hadn't added up. Suddenly everything clicked into place. "You've been cooking the books," he said quietly. "Setting me up." The business rival's smile widened. "You have no proof of that, but I have proof of your signature on some very interesting documents. Documents that could end your career." He stood up. "Think about it, Maxwell. Sometimes it's better to step down gracefully than to be pushed." After he left, Maxwell sat in silence, his mind racing. Everything he'd built was at risk. His legacy, his purpose, the only thing that had kept him going after losing his family, it could all disappear. His phone buzzed again. Jasmine. She'd been trying to reach him all morning. Part of him ached to call her, to hear her voice, to let her help him figure this out. But the larger part, the part shaped by years of loss and isolation, knew better. He couldn't drag her into this mess, couldn't risk her getting hurt when everything fell apart. And it would fall apart. It always did. Everyone he'd ever cared about, everyone he'd ever tried to protect. Maxwell picked up his phone, his fingers hovering over Jasmine's number. Then, deliberately, he blocked it. That evening, as he sat alone in his vast office, the city lights twinkling below, Maxwell felt the familiar numbness settling back in. It was safer this way. Easier. The walls he'd built around his heart had protected him for 20 years. They could protect him again. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was Jasmine's face. The way she looked at him with such hope, such belief in his capacity for change. The way she made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he deserved a second chance at happiness. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm just not strong enough." The next few days passed in a blur of meetings and legal consultations. Maxwell threw himself into work, into finding a way to fight back against the business rival's machinations. He ignored the growing hole in his chest, the way his mansion seemed even emptier than before, the way every Christmas decoration reminded him of Jasmine's touch. His assistant tried once to tell him that Jasmine had come by the office. Maxwell cut her off before she could finish, ordering that no visitors be allowed in without his explicit approval. He told himself it was necessary, told himself he was protecting her. But late at night, when the defenses he'd built started to crack, he knew the truth. He wasn't protecting Jasmine, he was protecting himself. From hope, from love, from the terrifying possibility that he might actually deserve both. The business rival's threats loomed larger with each passing day. Maxwell could feel his grip on the company slipping, could see the concerned looks from his employees, could sense the whispers in the corridors. Everything he'd worked for was crumbling, and this time he had no one to blame but himself. In his darkest moments, he wondered if this was his punishment, for abandoning his son, even unknowingly, for pushing away the one person who had managed to see past his defenses, for daring to believe, even for a moment, that he deserved more than this self-imposed exile from life. The Christmas season marched on, but Maxwell barely noticed. He worked longer hours, slept less, ate only when his assistant insisted. The walls around his heart grew higher, stronger, more impenetrable than ever. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between meetings, he would catch himself reaching for his phone, fingers itching to unblock Jasmine's number, to hear her voice again, to let her in. Those were the moments when he worked harder, pushed himself further, did whatever it took to drown out the voice in his heart that whispered of second chances and new beginnings. Because he knew now, had always known, really, that some things were beyond redemption. And some people like him didn't deserve to be saved. Jasmine stood at her kitchen window, watching the winter rain trickle down the glass. Her phone lay silent on the counter, a reminder of Maxwell's rejection. She'd tried calling, visiting his office, even sending messages through his assistant. Nothing. The wall he'd built was complete, and she was on the outside. Her son came up beside her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You okay, Mum?" She managed a smile, running her fingers through his curly hair. "I'm fine, baby, just thinking." But she wasn't fine. The past few weeks had shown her a different side of Maxwell, vulnerable, caring, capable of change. She'd watched him begin to thaw, like winter giving way to spring. Now he'd frozen over again, harder than before. In her living room, Christmas lights twinkled on their modest tree. The sight brought tears to her eyes as she remembered decorating Maxwell's mansion, how his face had lit up when she'd shown him how to string the lights just right. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered to herself, Her heart ached, but she knew what she had to do. Sometimes love meant knowing when to walk away. She picked up her phone one last time, typing out a message she knew would probably never be read. "I believe in you, Maxwell. I always will. But I can't keep throwing myself against your walls. When you're ready to let someone in, I hope you find the courage to do it. Goodbye." Across town, in his office, Maxwell sat surrounded by legal documents. The business rival's threats had become reality. There were irregularities in the company's accounts, signatures that looked like his but weren't quite right. His empire was under attack, and he was alone. Just as he'd always been. Just as he'd chosen to be. His eyes drifted to his phone. Jasmine's number was still blocked, but he could picture her face, hear her voice telling him that he didn't have to face this alone. That vulnerability wasn't weakness. A knock at his door startled him. His assistant entered, looking concerned. "Sir, I know you said no visitors, but there's someone here you need to see." Before Maxwell could protest, a young man walked in. He had familiar eyes. Maxwell's eyes. The son he'd never known he had. "I found him," his assistant explained softly. "After you mentioned the possibility. Well, I did some digging." Maxwell stood slowly, his heart pounding. The young man looked at him with a mixture of anger and uncertainty. "Why now?" his son asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Why look for me now?" Maxwell opened his mouth, but no words came. All his carefully constructed defenses, all his practiced isolation, none of it had prepared him for this moment. "I heard about you," his son continued. "Rich, successful, alone. Is that really all you want to be?" The words hit Maxwell like a physical blow. He sank back into his chair, memories flooding in. His wife's laugh, his lost child's smile, Jasmine's warm presence, her unwavering belief in him. "No," he whispered. "No, it's not." Something broke inside him then. Years of carefully maintained barriers crumbled, and for the first time in decades, Maxwell Harrison truly felt. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know about you. If I had—" "Would it have made a difference?" his son asked. "From what I hear, you've spent 20 years pushing everyone away." Maxwell looked at his son, really looked at him. He saw the pain of abandonment, the years of wondering why he wasn't wanted. The same pain he'd been inflicting on Jasmine by pushing her away. "You're right," he admitted. "I've been a coward. I lost my first family, and instead of learning to live again, I chose to stop living altogether." He stood up, his decision suddenly crystal clear. "But I don't want to be that person anymore." His son watched him cautiously. "What do you want to be?" "A father," Maxwell said, "if you'll let me try, and—" He reached for his phone, unblocking Jasmine's number with trembling fingers. Someone worthy of love. The message from Jasmine appeared immediately. Reading it made his heart clench, but it also filled him with determination. He couldn't let fear win again, couldn't let another chance at happiness slip away. "I have to go," he told his son, "but please, will you stay? Will you give me a chance to make this right?" His son hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'm not promising anything, but I'll listen." It was more than Maxwell deserved, and he knew it. He squeezed his son's shoulder gently as he passed, then rushed out of the office. The drive to Jasmine's house seemed endless. The rain had turned to snow, coating the city in white. It felt fitting somehow, a clean slate, a fresh start. When Jasmine opened her door, her eyes widened in surprise. Maxwell stood there, snowflakes melting in his hair, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "I'm sorry," he said before she could speak. "I've been running away my whole life, from pain, from love, from any chance of getting hurt again." but I don't want to run anymore." Jasmine crossed her arms, protecting her heart. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I met my son today," Maxwell said softly. And looking at him, seeing the pain I caused by not being there, it made me realize what I've been doing to everyone who tries to care about me. What I've been doing to you. He took a step closer, his voice thick with emotion. "You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. You believed in me when I'd stopped believing. And instead of being grateful, I pushed you away." Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. "I can't keep doing this, Maxwell. I can't keep letting you in just to have you shut me out again." "I know," he said. "I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm asking for one anyway. Because I love you, Jasmine, and I'm terrified of that love, but I'm more terrified of losing you." Maxwell sat at his mahogany desk, papers spread before him like fragments of a life he'd never known existed. Old employment records, faded photographs, and handwritten notes created a paper trail of memories he was desperately trying to piece together. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up a weathered employee file from 20 years ago. Maria Santiago. That was the name of the maid who had worked for his family. Her photograph showed a kind-faced woman with warm brown eyes, not unlike Jasmine's. Maxwell closed his eyes, trying to remember more about her. She had always been quiet, efficient, and incredibly loyal to his family. How had he never noticed? How had he been so blind to what was happening in his own home? "Mr. Harrison?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "I found something you might want to see." Sarah, his assistant of 15 years, entered his office carrying a thick manila envelope. She had been working tirelessly for the past week, helping him track down any information about Maria Santiago and her family. "What did you find?" Maxwell asked, his voice hoarse with anticipation. Sarah carefully laid out several documents on his desk. "Maria Santiago moved to Chicago after leaving your family's employment. She had a son there. His birth certificate lists no father, but the timing—" She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Maxwell picked up the birth certificate with trembling hands. "James Santiago." He read aloud. The date of birth made his heart clench. It aligned perfectly with when Maria had left their employment. "There's more," Sarah continued, pulling out more papers. "He was in the foster care system after Maria passed away when he was 12. He aged out of the system at 18, but I managed to trace his current location. He's here in the city, Maxwell. He works as a software engineer at TechStart Industries." Maxwell stared at the photograph attached to the employment record. The young man had his mother's warm, brown eyes, but Maxwell saw himself in the set of his jaw, the shape of his face. His son. His flesh and blood, living and breathing just miles away. His phone buzzed, and Jasmine's name lit up the screen. She had been his rock through this entire process, offering support and understanding even when he struggled to articulate his feelings. "Jasmine," he answered, his voice thick with emotion. "We found him." "Oh, Maxwell," she breathed. "Are you okay?" "I don't know," he admitted. "He's here in the city. He's been here all along, and I never knew." "What are you going to do?" Maxwell looked at the photograph again. "I need to see him. I need to try to make this right, somehow. Do you want me to come with you?" The offer made his heart swell with gratitude. "No, I think this is something I need to do alone first. But afterward, would you—" "I'll be here," she promised. "Whatever you need." After hanging up, Maxwell spent hours studying every detail in the files before him. His son had graduated top of his class despite being in the foster system. He'd worked his way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. Pride and guilt warred in Maxwell's chest. Pride for the remarkable young man his son had become, and crushing guilt for not being there to support him through it all. That evening, Maxwell drove to TechStart Industries. The modern glass building reflected the setting sun, turning the windows into sheets of gold. He sat in his car for nearly an hour, gathering his courage. Finally, he took a deep breath and walked inside. The security guard recognized him immediately. Being a prominent CEO had its advantages. "Mr. Harrison, this is unexpected. How can I help you?" "I need to see James Santiago," Maxwell said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. Minutes later, he stood outside a conference room, watching through the glass as a young man finished up a meeting. James was tall, with dark hair and an earnest expression as he explained something to his colleagues. Maxwell's throat tightened. He could see Maria in his gestures, in the way he smiled. When the meeting ended, James looked up and noticed him. Their eyes met through the glass, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Maxwell saw confusion flicker across his son's face, followed by recognition. His photo had been in enough business magazines over the years. James approached cautiously, stepping out into the hallway. "Mr. Harrison, can I help you with something?" Maxwell struggled to find his voice. "James, there's something I need to tell you. Something I only recently discovered myself." Understanding dawned in James's eyes, followed quickly by a flash of anger. "You're him, aren't you? My father?" Maxwell nodded, unable to speak. "Why now?" James demanded, his voice low but intense. "Why after all these years?" "I didn't know," Maxwell said softly. "I swear to you, I didn't know about you until recently. Your mother, she never told me." James crossed his arms, his posture defensive. "And what made you decide to look for me now?" Maxwell thought about Jasmine, about how she had helped him see that his life of isolation wasn't really living at all. "Someone helped me realize that I've been hiding from life for too long. When I learned about you, I couldn't hide anymore. You deserve to know the truth, and I would like the chance to know you, if you'll let me." James studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "I grew up wondering about you," he finally said. "Wondering why you weren't there, why you didn't want me. Mom never said anything bad about you, but she never explained either. And then when she died..." His voice cracked slightly. "I'm so sorry," Maxwell said, meaning it with every fiber of his being. "I know I can never make up for not being there, but if you're willing, I'd like to try to be part of your life now." James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so similar to Maxwell's own that it made his heart ache. "I need time to process this," he said finally. It's a lot." "Of course." Maxwell nodded. "Here's my card. It has my personal number on it. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here." As he turned to leave, James called out, "Mr. Harrison?" Maxwell looked back. "Thank you," James said quietly, "for telling me the truth." On the drive home, Maxwell's emotions overwhelmed him. He pulled over to the side of the road and called Jasmine. "He has a smile," he said when she answered. "And he's brilliant and successful, and he did it all on his own because I wasn't there for him." "Maxwell," Jasmine said gently, "you can't change the past, but you're here now. You're trying. That matters." "Does it?" he asked, his voice rough with unshed tears. "Is it enough?" "It's a start," she said. "And sometimes that's all we can do. Start where we are and try to do better." Maxwell looked out at the city lights, thinking about his son, about Jasmine, about all the years he'd wasted in self-imposed isolation. "Will you come over?" he asked. "I don't want to be alone tonight." "I'll be there in 20 minutes," she promised. When Jasmine arrived, Maxwell told her everything, every detail of his meeting with James, every emotion that had coursed through him. She listened with understanding, her presence a balm to his turbulent thoughts. I've spent so long running from relationships, from connections. He admitted. But seeing him today, it made me realize how much I've missed, how much I still want to experience. I want to know my son. I want to be worthy of being his father. And I want... He looked at Jasmine, his heart in his eyes. I want to build a future that includes love, not just work and isolation. Jasmine took his hand, squeezing it gently. Then that's what we'll do, she said simply. One day at a time. For the first time in years, Maxwell felt truly hopeful about the future. He had a son to get to know, a woman who believed in him, and a chance to become the man he should have been all along. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. As he sat there with Jasmine, watching the city lights twinkle beyond his windows, Maxwell made a silent promise to both his son and himself. He would no longer let fear keep him from living, from loving, from being the father and man he needed to be. Maxwell sat in his parked car outside the foster home, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. The building was modest but well-maintained, with cheerful flower boxes in the windows. It looked nothing like the cold institutional facility he'd imagined. Still, knowing his son had grown up here instead of with him made his heart ache. Jasmine reached over and squeezed his hand. "You don't have to do this alone," she reminded him gently. He gave her a grateful look. "I know. I can't believe I let this happen. All these years, while I was building my empire, my own son was here." The social worker's words from their earlier meeting echoed in his mind. James has had a difficult journey. Multiple foster homes, trouble in school. He's working now, but he's still struggling to find his footing. Taking a deep breath, Maxwell stepped out of the car. The weight of his choices pressed down on him as he and Jasmine walked to the entrance. Inside, they were greeted by Mrs. Rodriguez, James's current foster mother. "James isn't here right now," she explained, leading them to a small sitting room. "He works 2 jobs, trying to save up for college." Her eyes held a mix of pride and concern. "He's a good boy, Mr. Harrison. Smart, determined. But he carries so much hurt." Maxwell nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. On the walls he noticed photos of various children, some smiling, some serious. His eyes landed on one of James, probably taken a few years ago. The resemblance to himself at that age was striking. "He's had it rough," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "His mother's death hit him hard. He was only 15. After that..." She sighed. "The system isn't perfect, Mr. Harrison. Too many kids, not enough resources. James bounced between 3 homes before coming to us." The revelation hit Maxwell like a physical blow. While he'd been signing million-dollar deals and isolating himself in his mansion, his son had been mourning his mother and trying to find stability in a system that was overwhelmed and underfunded. "I should have been there," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. Jasmine's hand found his again, offering silent support. "You're here now," Mrs. Rodriguez said kindly. "That's what matters." Later that evening, back in his office, Maxwell stared at the stack of urgent business papers on his desk. His business rival had been making aggressive moves lately, threatening to take over several key projects. The board was getting nervous. They wanted Maxwell's full attention, his unwavering focus on protecting the company. But all he could think about was James. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Jasmine entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you could use this," she said, setting one in front of him. "The board meeting is tomorrow," he said, running a hand through his hair. "They're expecting answers, solutions. The business rival is pushing hard for a hostile takeover." "And what are you expecting from yourself?" Jasmine asked quietly. Maxwell stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline he'd helped shape. "I built this company from nothing," he said. 20 years of work, of sacrifice. But what did I sacrifice it for? I lost my wife and thought I'd lost my son. I buried myself in work instead of living. And now, he turned to face Jasmine, now I find out that while I was building this empire, my real son needed me. He still needs me. The company isn't going anywhere, Maxwell, Jasmine said. But James, this might be your only chance to be his father. The business rival will take everything if I step back now, Maxwell said, voicing his fears. Everything I've built? Is that what matters most? Jasmine challenged gently. The empire, or the people who could be your family? Maxwell looked at the photo of James he'd gotten from Mrs. Rodriguez, now sitting on his desk. His son's eyes held a wariness that spoke of too many disappointments, too many broken promises. I need to make a call, he said suddenly. Picking up his phone, he dialed his lawyer. John, I need you to draw up some papers. Yes, tonight. I'm stepping down as CEO. No, this isn't a joke. I want to retain majority ownership, but I'm appointing a new chief executive. Someone who can focus on fighting off the takeover bid. Yes, I'm sure. Some things are more important than business. After hanging up, he turned to Jasmine, who was watching him with tears in her eyes. You're choosing family, she said softly. I'm choosing life, he replied. Real life, not just existence. I've spent 20 years building walls and hiding behind work. Meanwhile, my son has been out there, struggling, thinking he wasn't wanted. I can't change the past, but I can change our future. The board won't be happy, she warned. Let them be unhappy, Maxwell said with newfound determination. I'll retain controlling interest, but someone else can handle the day-to-day operations. Right now, I need to focus on being there for James, on showing him that he matters more than any company ever could. That night, Maxwell wrote a letter to James, pouring out his heart. Dear James, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness or your trust. I wasn't there when you needed me, and no amount of explanations can make that right. But I want you to know that from this moment forward, you are my priority. Not my company, not my empire, you. I'm stepping down as CEO to focus on what truly matters. I want to be part of your life if you'll let me. I want to help you achieve your dreams, to support you in whatever way you need. Not because I feel guilty, though I do, but because you're my son, and I love you even though I've only just found you. I know it won't be easy. I know you have every reason to reject me. But I'm asking for a chance, not to make up for the past, because I know that's impossible, but to build something new, something real. I'll be here when you're ready. Take all the time you need. Your father, Maxwell. As he sealed the envelope, Maxwell felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in decades, he knew with absolute certainty that he was making the right choice. The business rival could try to take his company, the board could protest his decision, but none of that mattered anymore. He had a son to get to know, a relationship to build with Jasmine, and a life to start living. The empire he'd built could survive without him at the helm, but this chance at family, that was irreplaceable. Are you ready for tomorrow? Jasmine asked as they prepared to leave the office. Maxwell looked at the letter in his hand, then at the woman who had helped him find his way back to what mattered most. Yes, he said simply. For the first time in 20 years, I'm ready for whatever comes next. Tomorrow would bring challenges. The board meeting, the business rivals' machinations, the uncertain path ahead with James. But for once, Maxwell wasn't facing it alone. He had Jasmine's strength beside him and the hope of building a relationship with his son ahead of him. That was worth more than any empire he could ever build. Maxwell stood in the doorway of his son's new room, watching as James tentatively explored the space. The teenager's movements were cautious, like someone afraid to believe this was real. After weeks of legal paperwork, counseling sessions, and careful introductions, James had finally agreed to move in. "You can decorate it however you want," Maxwell said softly. "Make it yours." James ran his fingers along the desk, his expression guarded but curious. "I've never had my own room before. In foster care, we always shared." Jasmine stepped forward, her presence warm and steady beside Maxwell. "Why don't we go shopping tomorrow? Get some posters, maybe some new bedding, whatever makes you comfortable." James nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. It was these moments that made Maxwell's heart ache, the simple things his son had missed out on, the years they'd lost. But Jasmine had taught him not to dwell on regret. Instead, focus on the present, on building something new. "I'd like that," James said. "Could we maybe look at some computer parts too? I've been learning about programming." "Of course," Maxwell replied, perhaps too eagerly. He was learning to balance his desire to give James everything with the need to build trust slowly. "Whatever interests you." Later that evening, as they sat around the dining table, no longer the formal, cold space it had been, but warm with conversation and the smell of Jasmine's cooking, Maxwell watched his son and Jasmine discuss a book they'd both read. The sight filled him with a profound gratitude. "You're doing great," Jasmine whispered when James excused himself to get more water. "He's opening up more every day." Maxwell squeezed her hand under the table. "I couldn't do this without you. You've shown me how to be patient, how to listen instead of trying to fix everything with money or grand gestures." The transition hadn't been easy. The business rival had indeed tried to take advantage of Maxwell's reduced role in the company, but Maxwell had found that stepping back gave him clarity. He'd assembled a team of trusted executives who shared his vision, and while he maintained oversight as chairman, the day-to-day operations no longer consumed him. Instead, his days were filled with family counseling sessions, helping James with his schoolwork, and building the kind of home he'd forgotten was possible. Jasmine had moved in 2 months ago, bringing her warmth and wisdom to every corner of the house. "Dad?" James's voice still held a hint of uncertainty when using that word, but he was trying. "Could you help me with something tomorrow? There's this science project." "I'd love to," Maxwell replied, his heart swelling at the simple request. These were the moments that mattered, not board meetings or quarterly reports, but being there when his son needed him. The healing happened in small steps. Sometimes it was James sharing a memory from foster care, his voice tight with old pain. Other times it was Maxwell opening up about his own past, about the grief that had driven him away from human connection for so long. Jasmine was their bridge, helping them navigate the awkward silences and difficult conversations. She knew when to push and when to step back, her writer's sensitivity to human nature proving invaluable. One evening, after a particularly challenging therapy session where James had expressed his anger about being abandoned, Maxwell sat in his study, struggling with guilt. Jasmine found him there, staring at old photographs. "He needed to say those things," she said gently, perching on the arm of his chair. "It's part of healing." "I know." Maxwell leaned into her touch as she stroked his hair. "It's just hard hearing how much pain I caused him." "You're here now," she reminded him. "That's what matters. You're showing up every day, proving through actions that you're committed to being his father." The transformation of the house itself reflected their growing family bond. James's technical interests had led to a home automation system he'd designed himself. Jasmine's books and writing materials could be found in every room, along with comfortable reading nooks she'd created. Maxwell's stark modern decor had given way to family photos, art projects, and the controlled chaos of actual living. They created new traditions together. Sunday morning pancake breakfasts where James experimented with different recipes, movie nights where they took turns choosing films, family game nights that often ended in laughter and playful arguments. The community noticed the change, too. Neighbors who had once seen Maxwell as the reclusive CEO now knew him as the father who cheered at James's robotics competitions and hosted backyard barbecues. Jasmine's friends from her writing group became regular visitors, filling the once silent house with animated discussions about books and life. One Saturday morning, Maxwell woke early to find James already up, tinkering with a circuit board at the kitchen table. Jasmine sat nearby, typing on her laptop, occasionally asking James to explain what he was doing. "Morning," Maxwell said, pausing to kiss Jasmine's cheek before pouring coffee. "Early start?" "James is showing me how he's programming the house lights to respond to voice commands," Jasmine explained. "I'm thinking of writing an article about young inventors." "It's not that big a deal," James mumbled, but his pleased smile betrayed his pride. "It is a big deal," Maxwell said, sitting down beside him. "You're creating something new, something that could help people. That's always worth celebrating." Later that day, as they worked together in the garden, another new family activity Jasmine had introduced. Maxwell watched his son laugh at something she said. The sound was becoming more frequent, more natural. "I was thinking," James said, patting soil around a tomato plant. "Maybe we could invite some kids from my old foster home to use the pool this summer. There's never much for them to do, and—" "That's a wonderful idea," Jasmine said before Maxwell could respond. "We could make it a regular thing, maybe even set up some swimming lessons." Maxwell nodded, throat tight with emotion. His son, who had experienced such hardship, wanted to help others. "We could set up a program," he suggested. "Not just swimming, maybe tutoring, mentoring." "Really?" James looked up, his eyes bright with possibility. "Really," Maxwell confirmed. "We can work on it together, figure out what would be most helpful." That evening, as they sat on the back patio watching the sunset, Maxwell felt a deep sense of peace. Jasmine leaned against his shoulder, her presence as essential to him now as breathing. James sat cross-legged on the grass, pointing out constellations he'd been learning about. This was what he'd been missing all those years behind his office walls. Not just family, but connection, purpose, love that went beyond achievement or acquisition. "Thank you," he whispered to Jasmine. She smiled, knowing all he meant with those two words. Thanks for delivering that letter, for seeing past his defenses, for helping him find his way back to his son, for showing him how to love again. "We're all healing together," she whispered back. "That's what family does." Family. The word no longer brought pain or regret. Instead, it filled him with gratitude and hope. His son was home, his heart was open, and with Jasmine by his side, he was finally living the life he'd been afraid to dream of for so long. The December air was crisp and clear as snowflakes drifted past the mansion's windows. Inside, warmth radiated not just from the crackling fireplace, but from the love that now filled every corner of what had once been a cold, lonely home. "Dad, the star won't stay straight," James called from where he stood on a stepladder, attempting to adjust the Christmas tree topper. The word "Dad" still felt new on his tongue, but it came more naturally with each passing day. Maxwell hurried over, steadying both his son and the golden star. "Here, let me help. Sometimes it takes two people to get things right." Jasmine watched from the doorway, her heart full. The transformation of both the house and its inhabitants over the past few months had been remarkable. Where stark minimalism once ruled, family photos now lined the walls. James's robotics projects occupied an entire corner of the living room. Her manuscript drafts and research books were scattered across various surfaces, and nobody minded the creative chaos. "Remember when this place felt like a museum?" she said, walking over to help them with the decorations. Now it's actually a home. Maxwell's eyes softened as he looked around. I never realized how empty it was until it became full. The mansion had become a hub of activity, especially since they'd launched the Harrison Family Foundation 3 months ago. The foundation focused on supporting foster children and disadvantaged families, providing everything from educational resources to emergency assistance. James had been instrumental in shaping the foundation's mission, drawing from his own experiences in foster care. His technical skills proved invaluable in creating a database system to track and coordinate their efforts. The community center called earlier, Jasmine mentioned, hanging another ornament. They're overwhelmed by the response to our holiday giving program. Over 200 families signed up for assistance. We'll need to expand the budget, Maxwell said automatically, then smiled. I never thought I'd be so happy to spend money on something other than business acquisitions. James climbed down from the ladder, surveying their handiwork. Ms. Rodriguez from my old foster home said the laptops we provided are making a huge difference. The kids can actually do their homework now instead of trying to finish everything during library hours. The pride in his voice was unmistakable. At 17, James had found his purpose in helping others who faced the same challenges he had. His initial anger toward Maxwell had gradually transformed into understanding, and then into a deep bond built on shared values and growing trust. The doorbell chimed, and Jasmine hurried to answer it. That'll be the delivery from the toy drive. Soon, the foyer was filled with boxes of donated toys, each carefully labeled for different age groups. The family had spent weeks organizing this initiative, ensuring that every child in their program would have presents to open on Christmas morning. We should start sorting these, Maxwell said, rolling up his sleeves. The distribution event is tomorrow. They worked together, creating neat piles while Christmas music played softly in the background. James told stories about the kids he'd met through their programs, his face animated with genuine care for their well-being. You know, Jasmine said, folding a donation receipt. When I delivered that letter laced Christmas, I never imagined we'd be here now. Maxwell paused in his sorting. That letter changed everything. You changed everything. We all changed each other, she corrected gently. That's what family does. The word family no longer caused Maxwell pain. Instead, it filled him with gratitude and purpose. His son was home. His heart was open. And with Jasmine by his side, he had discovered a joy he'd thought was lost forever. As evening fell, they gathered in the kitchen to prepare dinner together, another new tradition that had replaced Maxwell's solitary meals. The space was warm with the aroma of baking cookies and the sound of casual conversation. I invited some of the kids from the community center to use the pool next summer, James mentioned, chopping vegetables. Is that okay? More than okay, Maxwell replied. We could set up regular swimming lessons, maybe even a summer program. Jasmine smiled at their exchange. These moments of casual planning for others' benefit had become natural, replacing Maxwell's former focus on profit margins and market shares. After dinner, they settled in the living room, admiring their decorated tree. The lights twinkled softly, casting a warm glow over family photos and handmade ornaments, each one representing a memory from their months together. I have something for each of you, Maxwell said suddenly, retrieving 3 small packages from his desk. I know it's not Christmas yet, but these feel right for tonight. He handed them out, watching nervously as they opened the boxes. Inside each was a key, attached to a silver keychain engraved with their names. These are symbolic more than practical, he explained. You both already have keys to the house, but I wanted something to represent that this is truly our home, all of us together. James turned the key over in his hands, his eyes suspiciously bright. Thanks, Dad. he whispered. Jasmine leaned over to kiss Maxwell's cheek, her own eyes glistening. "We love you too," she said simply. The room fell quiet except for the soft music and the crackling fire. Outside, snow continued to fall, but inside, warmth and love filled every corner of what had once been an empty mansion. Tomorrow would bring more work with the foundation, more families to help, more lives to touch. But tonight was for them, for this miracle of a family that had found each other against all odds. Maxwell looked at his son, engrossed in adjusting one of the tree's ornaments to hang just right. He watched Jasmine curl up in her favorite reading chair, contentment written across her features. The sight filled his heart with a joy so profound it almost hurt. This was what Christmas truly meant, not the perfect decorations or expensive gifts, but the love that could heal broken hearts and create new beginnings. As the first Christmas together approached for their little family, Maxwell knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found his way home. The early days of rebuilding their relationship were fragile, like walking on thin ice. Maxwell watched his son carefully unpack his belongings in his new room, wanting to help, but unsure how to bridge the gap between them. "You can arrange it however you want," Maxwell said softly from the doorway. "This is your space now." His son nodded, keeping his eyes focused on the task. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and years of absence. Jasmine, sensing the tension, stepped in with her natural warmth. "Hey, I was thinking of making some hot chocolate. Would you like some?" she asked, directing her question to Maxwell's son. "Sure," he replied, offering a small smile that felt like a victory. In the kitchen, while preparing the drinks, Jasmine quietly guided their interaction. "Tell Maxwell about your interest in engineering," she suggested gently. "He might have some insights." The conversation that followed was halting at first, but as they discovered shared interests, the words began to flow more easily. Maxwell listened intently as his son described his dreams of designing sustainable buildings, his heart swelling with pride and regret in equal measure. There were difficult moments, too. Sometimes his son's anger would surface unexpectedly, raw and justified. During these times, Maxwell forced himself to stay present, to weather the storm rather than retreat, as he once would have. Jasmine stood by them both, offering support without taking sides, helping them navigate the complex emotions of their developing relationship. Each small step forward felt monumental. The first time his son asked for help with a project, the evening they spent working together in Maxwell's home office, the morning they shared breakfast without awkward silences. These moments, though simple, were healing old wounds day by day. At the next board meeting, Maxwell stood before his executive team, his posture different from the rigid stance they were used to. "I'm stepping back from daily operations," he announced, his voice steady. "Sarah Matthews will be taking over as CEO, while I'll remain as chairman of the board." The news rippled through the room. Sarah, his trusted colleague of 15 years, nodded with quiet confidence. Maxwell had chosen her not just for her business acumen, but for her understanding of his new vision. "Our company needs to be more than profit margins," Maxwell continued. "We're launching the Harrison Foundation for Family Support. 25% of our annual profits will go directly to helping underprivileged families in our community." Back home, Jasmine beamed with pride as Maxwell shared the news. "You're doing the right thing," she said, squeezing his hand. "Your experience can help so many families who are struggling." Together, they began visiting community centers, meeting with local leaders, and identifying areas where they could make the biggest impact. Maxwell's son joined them on these visits, his initial reluctance giving way to genuine interest as he saw families receiving help with housing, education, and job training. The company's new direction brought unexpected benefits. Employee morale soared as people felt proud to work for an organization that prioritized social responsibility. Client relationships strengthened as partners aligned themselves with the company's humanitarian goals. Under Sarah's leadership and Maxwell's guidance, the company flourished. Profits remained strong while making a tangible difference in people's lives. Maxwell found himself energized by this new purpose, realizing that true success meant more than just financial gain. At home, the transformation was equally profound. Their house became a hub for community meetings and charity events, filling the once empty rooms with purpose and warmth. Maxwell's son took particular interest in the educational initiatives, often contributing ideas for programs that could help other young people like himself. One evening, as Maxwell sat in his study reviewing foundation documents, he heard muffled sobs coming from his son's room. His heart clenched. Walking down the hallway, he paused outside the door, uncertain whether to knock. "Go in," Jasmine whispered, appearing beside him. "He needs you, even if he doesn't say it." Maxwell found his son curled up on his bed, shoulders shaking. "I keep thinking you'll leave again," the boy confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "Every time you go to work, I wonder if you'll come back." Sitting on the edge of the bed, Maxwell felt the weight of his past decisions. "I know I wasn't there before," he said softly. "And I can't change that. But I promise you, I'm here now. For good." Jasmine joined them, offering quiet support as father and son talked through their fears. She shared stories of her own childhood, of learning to trust again after feeling abandoned. Her warmth and understanding created a safe space for both Maxwell and his son to be vulnerable. Over the following weeks, small changes appeared. His son began leaving his bedroom door open, started joining them for morning coffee, even showed Maxwell his college applications. Each gesture was a tiny bridge being built between them. During dinner one evening, his son actually laughed at one of Maxwell's awkward dad jokes. The sound filled the room with hope, and Maxwell caught Jasmine's knowing smile. It wasn't perfect, but they were healing, one day at a time. Through the frost-touched windows of the mansion, warm golden light spilled onto the snow outside. Inside, the home that had once echoed with emptiness now buzzed with life and laughter. The enormous Christmas tree in the living room sparkled with hundreds of twinkling lights, and underneath lay presents wrapped in colorful paper. Maxwell stood back, watching as his son carefully hung an ornament on a branch. A delicate glass ball that had belonged to Maxwell's own mother. The sight made his heart swell with emotion. "This is where it belongs," his son said softly, adjusting the ornament. "With family." Jasmine approached them both, carrying mugs of hot chocolate topped with whipped cream. "I think this calls for a celebration," she said, her smile brightening the room even more than the Christmas lights. Maxwell took a deep breath, taking in the scene before him. Just months ago, he had been alone in this very room, surrounded by wealth but empty of joy. Now the sound of his son's laughter mixed with Jasmine's warm presence filled every corner of the house. "You know," Maxwell said, his voice thick with emotion, "I spent years thinking success meant having the biggest company, the most money. I was wrong. This is success." His son moved closer, accepting the mug from Jasmine. "We've come a long way, haven't we, Dad?" That word, Dad, still made Maxwell's heart skip a beat every time he heard it. They gathered around the tree, the three of them forming a tight circle of love and belonging. Outside, snow began to fall gently, but inside, warmth and joy surrounded them. "To our first Christmas together." Jasmine raised her mug, and to many more. Maxwell looked at his son, then at Jasmine, overwhelmed with gratitude for this second chance at happiness. The mansion that had once felt like a mausoleum of his past now pulsed with life and possibility. Together, they had built something far more precious than any business empire. They had built a family. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe, and tomorrow I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.